Thank you for tuning in to Metropole Sports Center. My name is Nation Owano. On this particular day, the September of 6th, we're going to be talking about matters sports. On our running order today, we have a lot of sports issues to be talking about. We have good news that came from the Ministry of Sports. We have the results from the Kenya Premier League, first games that were played last weekend. Then we have results from the Christie Sevens, then Formula One action, which apparently had a tragic ending this past weekend where Antoine Herbert, a Formula 2 racer, passed away in an accident. Also, we'll be talking about the ongoing FIBA Basketball World Cup that is currently going on in Beijing, China. And finally, in studio today, we are going to be talking about talent scouting. Just how important is talent scouting? How important is it in terms of improving sports and identifying talents out here? So quickly, let's dive right into it. And onto the first good news that came from the Ministry of Sports this past week was a circular that gave a direction on how athletes' allowances were going to be handled. Now, according to the circular that was released by the PS, and I quote, it says, it will take maximum 48 hours to receive their money. All money will be deposited in the athletes' accounts. Also, he says all the teams must submit the final list of the list at least 14 days before travel. All teams will receive their dues before they travel. Athletes will always be paid first. All officials will be paid once they have completed the submission process for the athletes. I think for those of us who have been watching Metropole Sports Center, we've always been having this conversation for the past few weeks. I mean, there's a time we were talking about this issue of athletes allowances. There was a time that we were talking about athletes allowances, and there was a time that the women's basketball team, which was representing the country, had a problem. I mean, they even released a video stating or making an appeal to the government or to the relevant person to try and give them the allowances for the time that they were representing the country. Immediately after that, even before that issue had settled down, we had the All-African Games team that was planning to travel to Morocco to represent the country. They were kicked out of their hotel room at Utali Hotel. I mean, the main reason for that was because they had not been paid their allowances, and the relevant stakeholders had not ensured that they had been paid, or the hotel fees had been paid for that particular time. So I think coming from all the conversations that we've been having about athletes' allowances, is it sustainable for one to be an athlete? I think this particular story is a very important thing that is going to change how we look at sports. Just to take you back from the conversation from the women's basketball team, I managed to talk to some of them during the time that they were there. Though there was a bit of reservations about talking to it because there was matters, federation that were concerned. But at least it's a good thing that we are finally having a solution to that particular issue. Let's quickly dive right into the Kenyan Premier League, and the first games of the Kenya Premier League were played this past weekend, and this is just how the results are standing as we are talking at this particular time. So this is how the results are looking like in the Kenyan Premier League. There we have Sofapaka. They played Posta Rangers. Sofapaka won that game 1-2. Kariobangi Sharks versus Western Stima, they ended up at 2-2. Then there was Wazito versus Oia Sugar, 1-1. And then there's Kisumu All Stars versus Ulinzi Stars, who played. And Ulinzi Stars Kisumu All Stars actually lost to Ulinzi. I mean, if you're following the league, you realize that Kisumu All Stars are making their debut into the Kenyan Premier League. Then there is Mathare United, who played Bandari FC, and they ended at 0-0. Then there was Sony Sugar versus KCB. There was 3-0 in favor of KCB. And then there was Gor Mahia versus Tusker FC. Gor Mahia managed to thrash Tusker FC 5-2. And then there's Zoo Kericho versus Chemiril Sugar, which was 3-1. And then Kakamega Homeboys and AFC Leopards ended 1-0. I mean, as we are talking about the Kenya Premier League, we realized that just before the Kenya Premier League started, there was a bit of a problem with the pullout of SportPesa out of the sponsorship deals in the country. I mean, if you are a sports enthusiast, then you realize the impact or the role that SportPesa plays in sponsoring clubs in the country. I mean, they sponsor rugby, they sponsor football in the country. I mean, there are so many sports that SportPesa is currently sponsoring. I mean, earlier this week, the head of SportPesa, that's Ronald Karauri, Captain Karauri, he released a statement saying that they had been given a go-ahead by Kenya Revenue Authority to continue with their working in the country, which means from as a sports person, I think it will be interesting to see how that is going to be translated into the Premier League and probably into the sports teams that were being sponsored by SportPesa. Another action that took place this past weekend, we had the Christie Sevens that took place at the RFUEA grounds. This is how the results ended. There was the finals, which was Nakuru RFC versus KCB. That was the men's. KCB managed to win 12-7. The game ended at sudden death. And at the women category, Impala won against Mwamba RFC. On the third and fourth playoffs, there was Nakuru RFC, that is women, beat Northern Suburbs 22-0. And then the men, there was Impala versus Mwamba as well, which ended 21-14. The action this weekend turns on to Driftwood Sevens, which is going to be taking place in Mombasa. So in case you're in Mombasa and you are a fan of rugby, well, the place to be this coming weekend is that the Mombasa Sports Club. I mean, Mombasa Sports Club, that is 7th and 8th of September. So make sure you head on to that particular place and follow the rugby action live. I mean, sometimes it is interesting to watch it on TV the way you're watching Metropole Sports Center, but sometimes the action is where you see it live as the players are tumbling and fighting over the ball and everything. On to sad news that happened into Formula One action this past weekend. There was an accident that happened in the Belgian Grand Prix, and one driver lost his life. That is Antoine Hubert. Antoine Hubert lost his life during that particular accident. Antoine Hubert was a very young driver. He was only 22 years old. I mean, if you follow sports a lot, you realize that most of the athletes have at around that age, 22 years, that is when they are at their prime age in time. That is when at least their career is picking up. So just a few things that you need to know about Hubert, who was killed in the Formula 2 crash. He was 22 years old. He was at the go-karts in 2004, and he was the French Formula 4 champion 2013. And he was at the Renault Academy. So soon after the crash, when the crash happened, if you are following the Formula 1 action, you realize that particular game that particular race was cancelled. So Formula 2 action was cancelled on that particular day. But the Formula 1 action, which continued soon after that, where Charles Leclerc won that, we're going to be talking about that in a few. So this is just what Formula 1 champion Lewis Hamilton had to say about that particular accident. Lewis Hamilton says, and I quote, "I'm so saddened. I'm so sad, I beg your pardon. This has happened. Let's lift him up and remember him up. Rest in peace, brother." There are also other members of the Formula 1 action who paid tribute to Hubert soon after that particular accident. On to Formula 1 action that happened this past weekend. Charles Leclerc won the Formula 1 the Belgian Grand Prix this past weekend. I mean, he beat Lewis Hamilton. And we keep having this conversation every single now and then. I mean, the sweetness or the good thing about sports, or the entertainment part of sports, is where it is unpredictable. I mean, the other time we're talking about Max Verstappen winning, then Leclerc is here winning. The other time we don't know who's going to win. Maybe it's going to be Valtteri Bottas, or it's going to be Lewis Hamilton. I mean, that's the sweetness of the sport. The same way in the Driftwood Sevens that is happening this coming weekend. I mean, KCB won the Christie Sevens, but it will be interesting to watch and have that element of suspense is good, because we really have to sit there and watch and see who's going to win the game that particular time. Then currently what is going on in the world of basketball, we have FIBA Basketball World Cup that is currently going on in Beijing, China. I mean, we've been talking about this. We were giving you a countdown before the World Cup started. It started and now it's currently ongoing. So as we are speaking right now, this is how the tallies stand. At the moment, we have Germany versus Jordan, which ended 96-62 in favor of Germany. Then we have USA versus Japan, which ended 98-45. And then we have Turkey versus Czech, which was 76-91 in favor of Czech. And then there was Canada versus Senegal. I mean, an African team representing us in the FIBA, in the Basketball World Cup. Senegal won that game, lost that game 60-82. But it's always a moment of pride when we see an African country representing us in international championships. There is Greece versus New Zealand, which ended 103-97 in favor of Greece. And then there is Lithuania versus Australia, which ended 82-87 in favor of Australia. And then finally we have Brazil versus Montenegro. Brazil won that game against Montenegro, beating Montenegro 84-73. Now, just according to, this is how the tally stand in terms of the leading players in the tournament so far. We have Corey Webster from New Zealand, and then we have Bogdanovic from Serbia. This is the top list of the leading top scorers in the tournament as you're speaking right now. I mean, the tables are bound to change because there's a game that is going to be played at 11 tonight. So immediately after Sports Center, the tally or how the table stand is going to have changed by then. But as at the time we're going on air, this is how the table stands. There is Corey Webster from New Zealand. There is Bogdanovic, Serbia. And then there's Gunnar Ra from Korea, and then there's Patty Mills from Australia, and then there's Da Taka from Jordan. Interesting lineup right there. The top five, there isn't a player from the US, but let's see, as I've mentioned, let's see how that is going to change probably in the next one or so day. In terms of the leading team so far with points, we have Serbia with 323 points so far. There's New Zealand 284, there's USA 279, there's Italy 277, and then there's Australia 276. It's usually very hard when you're talking about basketball not to mention the United States. So whether you're talking about it passively or you're having a conversation about basketball, the US will always find a way to appear on that rostrum of list. Quickly, let's jump on to the English Premier League. Let's see how the games were this past weekend. There was a tantalizing game that was played on Sunday. That was my team, Arsenal versus Tottenham Hotspurs. As an Arsenal fan, I'll say I'm happy. At least we took a point home. I know there are some of my friends who know that I'm an Arsenal fan and were waiting to probably ridicule me if we lost that game. So apart from having a good spot on the Premier League table, bashing was also on the table for me. But good thing I managed to survive the bashing, at least for this particular weekend. So far this is how the table stands. So far, this is how the table stands on the English Premier League. There is Everton versus Wolves, that is 3-2. There is Arsenal versus Tottenham Hotspurs, I've already mentioned, that is 2-2. There's Southampton versus Manchester United. I know one of my colleagues who's in the gallery, Cindy, was so much disappointed that they had a draw. Manchester United, which was 1-1. There was Chelsea versus Sheffield, 2-2. Crystal Palace versus Aston Villa, 1-0. Leicester versus Bournemouth, 3-1. Then there was Manchester City versus Brighton. My guest today mentioned she's a Manchester United fan. At least she's walking into the studio with a lot of pride. The Manchester City supporter, so she walked into the studio with a lot of pride. I mean, she has every reason to, considering that Manchester City beat Brighton 4-0. Then there was Newcastle versus Watford, 1-1. Then there was West Ham versus Norwich, 2-0. And then Burnley versus Liverpool, 3-0. I mean, Liverpool are on a winning streak so far. So far, they've won 13 games. Let's see how that odd is going to turn up. So that is all we had on the league's review. We take a short commercial break, but when you're coming back, we're going to be having Christine Karimi from Dream Football Kenya. She's going to be talking about the affiliation that the organization has with football legend Luis Figo and what they're doing in the country to improve the state of sports in the country. My name is Nation Owano. Let's see you on the other side of the break.